If you're looking for one of the strongest melee builds in Path of Exile 2 right now, this is definitely it. It literally shits on any content in the game.
I wish a guy would take a dump on my chest.
I have played quite a few gemling builds this league, and this has easily become one of my favorites. It has excellent clear speed, very high boss damage, and it's one of the strongest builds I've played for farming heavily juiced grand expeditions. The build revolves around Earth Shatter, but most of the damage actually comes from combining several different mechanics rather than simply scaling one skill. We're using Gemling's quality scaling to massively increase Earth Shatter's damage and generate aftershocks. Infernal Cry detonates those spikes while also destroying frost walls created through our cock. Verglar then grants a huge amount of added cold damage based on the life of those frost walls, turning every detonation into a massive burst of damage. The build also has two different versions depending on what content you're farming. For mapping, I'm running Loreweave together with Herald of Ice. This gives us excellent clear speed, allowing Herald chains to wipe out entire screens with very little effort. For grand expeditions, I swap over to Invictus together with Detonate Dead. Since expedition monsters have extremely high maximum life, Detonate Dead ends up dealing massive damage, while Harbinger of Madness provides another source of life-based scaling. Combined with Headhunter, this setup makes heavily juiced expeditions surprisingly comfortable to farm. I'll explain both versions throughout the guide, but the passive tree stays almost identical. You're mainly swapping a few skills and items depending on the content you want to run. So let's start with the gems and go through how the build actually works. First up, Earth Shatter. The main thing we're scaling here is gem quality. Earth Shatter gets both more damage per spike and additional aftershocks from gem quality, making it one of the biggest damage multipliers in the entire build. We also get some additional chance to create aftershocks, giving us even more overlap during mapping and bossing. For supports, I'm using Kyom's Madness together for extra spikes, and Varana's Siege for AoE and damage. Then we have Verglas, which is one of the core gems that makes this entire setup work. It grants additional cold damage whenever frost walls are destroyed based on their maximum life. That's why we're scaling Frost Wall to roughly 200,000 life. Every time Infernal Cry or Earth Shatter destroys those walls, we gain a massive amount of added cold damage. To generate those frost walls, I'm using Cast on Critical Strike, so we never have to cast it manually. And also, having this gem means we don't need something like Sacred Flame to stack additional elemental damage, since Verglas already provides such a large amount by itself. For Whirling Slash, this is our movement skill, simple as that. Make sure it's only allocated to weapon set 1, since this is where we're using Rigwolds for the additional attack speed. The faster Whirling Slash becomes, the smoother the entire build feels while mapping. Then we have Rapid Attacks. Since we're playing Chaos Inoculation, spending life to gain attack speed has essentially no downside. We only have one life anyway, and a single life regeneration roll completely offsets the life cost, making Medveds a no-brainer. The remaining supports are mostly quality of life. Knockback makes moving through packs much smoother, while Morgan's Insight allows us to break frost walls if we don't instantly break them via Earth Shatter. Ghost Dance is one of the main defensive layers in the build, so you'll want enough evasion to consistently regenerate energy shield. This is also why Jade from Mageblood becomes super valuable when mapping. We then have charge regulation. For charges, the goal is to keep every charge active at the same time. Power charges give us crit chance. Endurance charges provide armor. Frenzy charges increase skill speed, and together they become a significant damage and defensive boost. I'm also using Berserk together with Diala's Desire for the additional gem quality. Besides giving us more maximum rage, we're also scaling Rage Effect, which ends up being a massive source of attack damage. Mystical Rage is another huge multiplier, converting all of that rage into even more damage. If you can afford a Megalomaniac with Mystical Rage, I highly recommend picking one up later on. We then have Infernal Cry, granting us some lovely bonuses. It detonates every Earth-Shatter spike, destroys our frost walls, grants a large amount of extra fire damage, and creates the chain reactions that make the build feels more satisfying than busting. If you don't have Eternal Rage on your amulet yet, you can also generate rage through Infernal Cry instead by investing into Warcry cooldown recovery and Raging Cry. For mapping, I'm running Herald of Ice together with Armor Explosion. Since Spirit of the Wolf allows Herald of Ice to break armor, we can just pair that with having Cold Attunement, allowing Armor Explosion to inherit cold damage and immediately trigger another Herald chain, making clear speed much smoother. For Grand Expeditions, however, I swap Herald of Ice for Blasphemy with Temporal Chains together with Hex Bloom. Expedition monsters have far too much life for Herald of Ice to carry the clear, so slowing everything down and spreading the curse ends up being much more valuable. Lastly, we have Mana Remnants together with Mind over Matter. Mana is another defensive layer for this build. Mana Remnants continuously refill and overflow our mana pool, while the additional mana regeneration from gem quality offsets the reduced recovery from Mind over Matter. Combined with Recover Mana on kill on our gems, mana stays topped off even during heavily juiced content. Alright, let's move over to the gear. Starting with the weapon, I'm using Sadist's Mercy. The main reason is Harbinger of Madness. It adds another source of damage that scales extremely well in Grand Expeditions, where monsters have massive life pools. On top of that, it also gives us crit chance, and actually a lot of DPS, more than just using a regular mace. For the body armor, this depends on what content you're farming. When I'm mapping, I'm using Loreweave. The additional gem quality is a huge damage increase for Earth Shatter, and the Shatter mechanic allows Herald of Ice to chain through entire packs. For Grand Expeditions, I swap over to Morior Invictus instead. We lose some damage and clear, but gain significantly more defense and spirit, while Detonate Dead takes over as our main clearing mechanic anyway. For the gloves, you're mainly looking for evasion or energy shield, and as many useful offensive stats as possible. If you're running the Grand Expedition version, evasion becomes your priority because Ghost Dance scales directly from it, and you won't have the evasion from Mage Blood. Attack speed, melee skill levels, and additional damage are all great bonuses if you can afford them. The boots are pretty straightforward. We're using Whirling Slash for movement, so movement speed isn't nearly as important as it normally would be. Instead, prioritize Energy Shield, Resistances, and Rarity. I'm also using Wanderlust for the immunity to Temporal Chains and Chill, but that's more of a luxury upgrade than a requirement. For the amulet, this is one of the biggest damage pieces on the character. Ideally, you're looking for +4 melee skill levels, gem quality, spirit, defenses, and eternal rage. Eternal Rage isn't mandatory though, since Whirling Slash and Infernal Cry can generate rage by themselves, but it makes maintaining rage much smoother during boss fights. Moving over to the rings, you mainly want flat added damage together with an unset ring base for the additional skill slots. You'll also need at least one source of mana leech somewhere on your gear, plus one life regeneration roll. That single life regeneration roll is extremely important. Since we're playing Chaos Inoculation, while Medveds and Berserk spends life to gain attack speed and damage, one source of life regeneration completely offsets that downside, allowing us to benefit from the bonuses without constantly killing ourselves. For the belt, I swap depending on the content. Mage Blood is my preferred choice for mapping because it gives us much more consistent defenses. For grand expeditions, however, Headhunter is simply too strong to ignore. Expedition spawns a huge number of rare monsters, allowing Headhunter to stack dozens of modifiers and completely take over the map. Now, for the weapon setup. Weapon set 1 is purely for Whirling Slash. You're looking for the highest attack speed spear you can find. Outside of attack speed, the stats really don't matter that much since this weapon isn't used for our damage. Our damage setup is in Weapon Set 2. For the Scepter, simply stack as much spirit as possible. A lot of people ask why I'm not using Sacred Flame. But because Verglar already gives us such a huge amount of added cold damage through Frostwall, the extra elemental damage from Sacred Flame isn't nearly as valuable here. If you happen to find an amazing Palm of the Dreamer with a lot of spirit, then sure, go for it. But I prefer the added spirit. For charms, I'm using Breath of the Mountains for automatic power charge generation, Spirit of the Wolf to enable armor, breaking through Herald of Ice, and freeze immunity. The Mana Flask is also a big part of our defense. Together with the Guard modifier on Loreweave, it constantly refills our mana pool and gives us a shit ton of Guard. Since we're pressing the flask constantly anyway, it ends up giving us another layer of defense essentially for free. Finally, let's talk about jewels. Recover mana on kill is mandatory. Without it, you'll eventually start running out of mana because you'll spend a lot when taking damage via mind over matter. I'd also like to mention that if you for some reason end up sucking balls at the game and go out of mana, then just remove mind over matter. It's fine, but you'll lose a lot of defense, so it's up to you. Moving over to the passive tree, we start with our Gemling Ascendancy. For Virtuous Barrier, the most important modifier is the increased energy shield. The mana regeneration is also useful, and since we're using a large number of skills, we continue gaining a lot of energy shield and evasion as the map goes on. The most important ascendancy point, though, is the additional gem quality via Advanced Thaumaturgy. This provides a large amount of damage for Earthshatter and improves all of the other skills used in the build. We also take Gem Studded. Make sure you have the same number of Strength and Intelligence support gems so you receive the full benefit. For Grand Expeditions, I use the Thaumaturgical Infusion for more maximum resistances. When mapping, Loreweave already handles our maximum resistances, so this is no longer needed. Instead, I take Adaptive Capability because the mapping version doesn't receive the same additional attributes from Morior Invictus. This allows us to meet the requirements for all of our different gems. For pathing, I'm using Split Personality Ruby with Shadow. This allows us to avoid many of the shitty travel nodes and move directly towards the good nodes in the monk section of the tree. To set this up, you first need to path from the mercenary starting area over towards the monk side. Once Split Personality is socketed, the shitty connecting nodes can be removed. Starting with the nodes at the monk area, we're taking evasion and energy shield wherever possible, together with as much critical hit chance as we need. If you're using Garukan's support, the goal is to reach 50% critical hit chance, while power charges are active. For regular jewels, look for critical hit chance and critical damage bonus. Sapphire jewels can also provide additional energy shield, while emerald jewels can give attack speed and damage. I prefer the defensive sapphire setup. The critical strike cluster here is only allocated in weapons set 2, since that is our earth-shatter damage setup. After that, we take some area of effect before traveling upwards towards chaos inoculation. This makes us immune to chaos damage and enables the low life and life cost interactions used elsewhere in the build. The next cluster provides most of our ailment threshold and stun threshold. These nodes are very important. Without them, the character gets stunned and affected by ailments far too often. We then have our split personality. The next major jewel is heroic tragedy. The important part is that it must be a Varana jewel, because that allows us to transform the nearby keystone into Black Scythe training. This grants increased energy shield based on strength. With around 240 strength, this provides 120% increased energy shield from the jewel interaction alone. Next is the Megalomaniac. The important notable is Mystical Rage, because this is one of the largest damage sources in the build. On my current character, it accounts for close to half of the total damage. You can also obtain Mystical Rage from an amulet or helmet, but using a Megalomaniac is usually the cheapest option. For the second notable, just look for anything useful. We then allocate Mind over Matter for additional defense. Since the build has strong mana recovery and can overflow its mana pool through mana remnants, mana becomes another effective defensive pool. After that, we move back to some weapon set 1 passives. This is our whirling slash setup, so we're mainly looking for defense and attack speed rather than damage. Next, we take the nearby defensive nodes together with Hollow Keeper. If you combine reduced curse effect from the tree with the matching rune, the character becomes almost completely immune to curses. Wanderlust is another option. It is more expensive, but it provides full immunity to temporal chains at least. The next socket contains a time-lost diamond. The best modifiers here are additional maximum rage, attack speed, and critical damage bonus, and crit chance. I also have a crafting guide for this jewel. The process is the same as the emerald version, except that you start with a time-lost diamond instead. On a lower budget, any useful time-lost jewel will work. From there, we take some additional critical hit chance, deflection, and critical damage. I'm also using a +3 Earth-Shatter jewel. These are currently fairly cheap right now, but will likely go up in price after this video like usual, so in that case, just use a regular crit jewel. Catalysis allows us to occasionally take elemental damage instead of physical damage, which helps trigger Breath of the Mountains and generate power charges. Finally, we take some additional skill speed and deflection for weapons set 1, together with the attack speed nodes for our spear. The remaining jewel socket can be filled with another critical strike, energy shield, or defensive jewel depending on what the character still needs. Good shit. Next, let's head on over to a map and see how you play the build. The rotation is simple. Just use Earth Shatter for damage, 2 to 3 times, and then you can blow them up via Infernal Cry in case everything around you isn't dead already. For movement, we have Whirling Slash, of course. And, well, that's about it. For a quick tip, you can also play Earthshatter as a ranged build. Just place your cursor far away, and you now have a ranged setup instead, which is great if you're ever low on energy shield. And if you're playing on console, well then go buy a fucking PC. Alright folks, that's all you need to play this amazing build. Drop a sub, and I'll see you in the next one.